Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're glad you're here with us. This morning, we have the honor of speaking with Bryan Alzate with United Recovery Project, and we're pleased to announce that we are starting with working with them for the next year. And we want to introduce you to Bryan, and he has some interesting information to share with us. So, welcome, Bryan. We appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
So, Bryan, to start off, why don't you just share with us a little bit about your history and your personal background? Just tell us who you are.
Born and raised in South Florida. I'm from Davie. Grew up here my whole life. Started using drugs at a young age. People always ask me like, how did you become like when I tell people my story, I guess they're like just confused at how like a young kid started using. And I don't think it had anything to do with my parents. I just feel like from a young age I was just attracted to things that were fast paced and exciting, and I believe I was born an addict, and I believe that once I started using any type of substance it just kind of took off from there, and maybe a little bit of curiosity, and started using pretty hardcore by the age of 14. So by the age of 14, I was addicted to crack and Oxycontin and opiates pretty much. And I got clean at 17, and I owe everything to, the 12 steps and the 12-step program. I believe like that's, people always ask me like, what was it that changed and what made you want to get clean? And going to meetings and following with the program is what made me want to get clean. Of course, I went to treatment and I had therapy, and all those things are a great head start. But I believe that long-term recovery for me was due to and still due to, working a program and having a sponsor and doing the 12 steps. I
Great.
don't know if you wanted me
Thanks
to
for
like go
sharing that.
deeper into like my story or whatever.
Well, no, that's great. That's a great start for us, and we can certainly relate to what you've shared so far. So, when you made the decision, realized that you had a problem that you wanted to correct, when you made the decision to take the steps to do that, what did you do to gain the strength and the courage to go forward?
Well, I mean, I don't believe that an addict really wants to use. I believe that that's the difference between an person with addiction and a person that's using drugs. Is that a person with addiction is doesn't want to use drugs and they're using drugs against their will. I didn't know that when I was using. I only learned that later on. But looking back, I really didn't want to keep using drugs, and there was plenty of times where I would try to stop on my own. There was times where I would throw drugs away, or I would really try to change, and I just could never do it. So I don't think it was a matter of like making a decision. I think that I just didn't believe that it was possible after a certain amount of attempts. So by the time my family was noticing and telling me, why don't you just stop? I knew I couldn't stop. I felt in my heart I couldn't stop. I did not think that I could. I felt that the people that were talking to me had no idea how bad it really was, and that if it was that easy to just stop, I would have already. And I totally gave up, just admitted that I was going to be an addict forever. And I ended up going to detox through an intervention. I had like a whole intervention with my family and the school that I was at, and I broke down crying and saying I needed help. But it wasn't really because I needed help. It was more of like, well, they're either going to be mad at me or like sympathize with me. So if I like say that I need help, it's just an easier way out. I really didn't think that I was going to get real help or that it was going to change anything. I thought that I might go to treatment for a week and keep using. And when I started to go to meetings, I started to hear stories and stories and stories. And I think, being an addict, one of the traits that I have growing up is that I could tell who was genuine and who wasn't. And when I started to hear story after story with so much detail and stories, wait, because I thought I was the worst drug addict in Florida. And I would hear stories that really made mine seem really insignificant to me. people that shot IV heroin for 30 years that were homeless and couldn't read and write, and they get clean and they go back to school and now they have 3 master's degree in psychology or something, you know. So I would just hear all these stories, and it took about a couple months, but I think one day I heard this one guy speak at a meeting and it just resonated with me. And I went home thinking that I can do this, you know? And I started to think that what if I did stay clean, like that started to seem crazy to me. And I think that drugs at first were attractive to me because it was so crazy, you know, like it was shocking and whatever. And I started to see recovery the same way, that how crazy would it be if I actually stayed clean, you know? And I started to learn about the program and I started to read the book. And I think what most people do is they just ask like, how do you stop? But I don't think addicts really stop. They kind of just focus on something else. So I started to focus my attention on something positive, and I started to focus who I hung out with people in recovery. And I really made my life recovery after that, you know? So I think that,
Absolutely.
what was that?
I said absolutely. And we're
Hmm.
glad you did that. I mean, we're very glad that you're sharing your story, because I think so many of us need to hear it from someone like yourself that has been successful and believes in your journey, and give us all moms hope. So
Well,
can
I
you
meet
share with
moms all
us?
the time. What was that?
Go ahead. No, go
Oh,
right
I
ahead.
meet moms all the time that are like, "Oh, not my kid. He's not going to listen to you," or you know, "My son's not like you." And they see me now. They don't see me like when I was on drugs, you know? And I meet parents all the time that are telling me, "Oh, my kid is never going to get clean," or "I don't see them ever changing," or "I don't think he would like that kind of stuff." And you know, I have a different take on it because I was that kid, you know, where no one thought I'd ever be interested in even staying clean or even talking to someone about recovery or going to meetings. And what I tell people is that you'll be surprised how much a drug addict wants help, because it could be the rudest kid in the world that doesn't want help and is screaming and yelling that they don't need anything, and that person could be dying for it, you know, and interested in it and just doesn't know how to show it.
So, Brian, while we're on this little bit of a topic, can you share with us a little bit about how it affected your family, your mom, when you were in active addiction, and how you kind of overcame that with her?
Of course. So you know, there's been times where I bring my mom to meetings and stuff like that because she's such a huge part of why I stayed clean. And if anything, she was probably the only person during my active addiction that was always there, you know. I could tell you that I had a really amazing relationship with my father as a kid, and once I started using drugs, it kind of became me versus him. And my mom was kind of the, so I believe in like most parenting situations, there's someone who's kind of the enforcer and then someone that's kind of the enabler, right? And obviously, my father was kind of more the enforcer. He kind of felt that I was just being disobedient and I wasn't listening to him and getting really upset. Where my mother was more of like, there's something wrong with you. Let me help you. What's going on? Trying to talk to me. And as I kept using, you know, my father became more and more angry and my mother became more and more anxious and worried. And throughout my entire using, my mom was like setting booby traps. Like, I would sneak out the house and she'd be in the bushes waiting for me, you know. I'd steal her car and she'd call me and be like, "Where are you?" You know. My mom was just always there trying to ruin whatever I was trying to do, you know. I'd be on the phone talking to a drug dealer and she'd be listening on the other side of the door, you know. She'd be going through all my clothes, turning over my mattress, looking for paraphernalia, going through the trash, trying to find little baggies in the trash. And she would find little baggies and confront me and say, "What's this?" and try to talk to me, and sometimes she wouldn't tell my father because she knew my dad would get upset. She's like, look, if I tell your dad this, he's gonna kill you. So just tell me what's going on, tell me what I could do to help you. And I think that's how it was in the beginning, and then there became a point where she just did not recognize me. There became a point where I no longer looked at her as my mom. I looked at her as something that's in the way, and if I could say the right things or intimidate her or scare her, then maybe she would give me some money, you know. And as an addict, it's really crazy to think about that, because if anybody yelled at my mother or screamed at her or called her some of the things that I called her, or made her cry, you know, or hurt her, I would flip out because that's my mom, you know. But no one hurt my mother more than I did, you know. And I think when I was using, I just could not feel that. You know, I remember my brother telling me, like mom cries at night, like, like you make her like cry, like she's losing it over you. And I just couldn't feel, I just didn't even, there was nothing there. I just didn't feel anything, And towards the end of my using, my mother was realizing that one day she was going to find me dead. Like I knew that my mother was trying to do something. And my mother took me to psychiatrist, court. I've been to military school. She would pick me up from court. And there was a time when my dad was kind of like, there was a time when my father was just like, look, he's your kid now. I'm not helping him. I'm not giving him a second chance anymore. I'm not picking him up from court. You're going to figure out his issues, and when he turns 18, he's out of the house. And my mother never once like flinched. She's like, that's totally fine. I'll take him to court. I'll take him to his drug testing. I'll take him to probation. I'll drop him off at school. And my mother never once made it seem like this was difficult. Like if I called her and said, hey mom, I'm stuck somewhere, she never would like say, oh, I can't go get you right now. She'd be like, all right, I'll be right there. When I went to military school, I went to school that was 4 hours away, and my mom would drive to come pick me up all the time, So I just felt like my mother's ability to be there was just never ending. And at the end, it was like annoying because it was just like, she's always there, right? And then I believe there was a couple times where it was just really sad. I remember me getting high and my mom having her little briefcase, and she'd be knocking on the door saying, you got to get dressed and go to school. And I was noticeably extremely intoxicated and high, and she would just bang on the door for me to open it, and she would open it and just be like, oh my God, she's got to go to work. She has a meeting. She can't stay home and just watch me. Who knows what I'm going to get into. And it would be like 7:30 in the morning on a Monday, right? And my mom has a whole busy day planned. And I remember like she just dropped her briefcase and was like, please go to school. And I remember telling her like, I can't go. I'm not going. And that was just like a regular day of my mom worrying 24/7. And then when I got clean, she was like the only one in my family that was really encouraging me to go to meetings. So I think at first she didn't want me going to meetings because there was no people my age there, but I had never really hung out with people my age, because you got to realize I was 17 years old. So I would tell my mom like, oh my God, I went to this meeting and this guy from prison spoke and this other person was there and he was like an ex-gang member, and they all live in this halfway house. And my mom would be like, oh my God, Bryan, like, can you just find some people your age, Can you like play sports or something? And my mother would take me to meetings. My mother took me to meetings, and she would pick me up on the way home, and she would drop me off, and she took me back the next day. And anytime I wanted to go to a meeting, my mother was willing to drive me to go to meetings, At that point, me and my father still didn't have a good relationship, and he would tell me that meetings were stupid. He would tell me that it was a waste of time. He would tell me that I need to be strong, I need to be a man, and he would tell me that if I keep hanging out with losers, how am I ever going to be a winner? So in my father's eyes, people that went to meetings were losers, you know? But from the first time I went to meetings, I knew that there was something about them. I knew that the people here were very much like me. And my mother kept taking me and kept taking me. And I think she started to see that I was clean and never gave up on me, you know. And there was times where me and my father would argue, and this is with 5, 6 months clean. And I remember I would lock myself in my door, and I was probably on the verge of getting high. And I remember my mother would wait on the other side of the door all night. You know what I mean? And she would tell me, "You're not going to get high. I'm not leaving you. We're going to stick this out together." And I would tell her, like, what's the point of me staying clean if no one thinks that I'm clean and my life still sucks and I have no friends? And, you know, I just felt like it wasn't getting better. You know, I was clean 4, 5, 6 months, but my dad didn't think I was clean. I got kicked out of school twice clean. So, you know, I was fighting in school, had a whole bunch of behavioral problems still. I just wasn't using. And I remember just feeling like giving up. And I remember that one night my mom just waited outside the door for me all night, you know, and I stayed clean. Um, and I remember during active addiction, we'd go to visit people, and people would say things like, I don't think your son's going to get better. And my mom would grab her purse and say, "Oh, he's going to get clean. We're done here," you know? And I remember her talking to my therapist in treatment and her asking, like, "Hey, what are the chances that my son doesn't do drugs again?" And they would tell her. I remember my therapist told my mom, he's going to have a really rough road. This is going to affect him for the rest of his life. And my mother would be like, "No, he's going to get clean." Like, my mom always would say that. "Oh, my son's going to get clean. You don't understand. He's getting clean." And I'm sure people thought she was crazy, right? And my mother would say, "I don't believe what you're saying. He's going to get clean. I can see it. He's going to be clean one day." And, you know, hopefully one day you guys might be able to interview her. But if you talk to her, my mom is like a very religious person. And there's been times where, like, my mom has this religious Christian meeting at the house, like every Wednesday, right? So there's been times where I've had like 5, 6 years clean. I'd go visit my parents' house for something, and I'm trying to avoid these crazy Christian people, right? I'm like, "Oh, I'm not going to go inside the house or whatever." So I go through like the back door, and my mother will grab me and say, "Come, you gotta go into the living room." And I'll go there, and my mom will tell them, like, you know, "This is my miracle. You know, my son is the reason why I have faith today, because I always knew he would get clean." And I know that's not every mother's story, you know. I know not every mother has a success story like that. And it took me a long time to even realize what I was doing, you know. I went to my first funeral of one of my close friends who overdosed when I had 9 months clean. And I remember talking to his mom and realizing that she doesn't have a second chance. He doesn't have a second chance. Going to a kid's funeral who's 20 years old is always like the worst thing, you know. And I remember just thinking, like, I don't want to do that to my mom. You know, I don't want my mom to have to deal with this for the rest of her life. And working in treatment, like, I deal with moms all the time. You know, I deal with people's parents of kids who's passed away. And it's really terrible. I can't, you know, you can't stop thinking about things you should have done differently, and reaching out to the moms. And I don't know. I just know that it's not easy to be a parent. You know, like, I'm not a parent. Like, I don't really understand what it's like to have a kid. But I believe that my mom was someone who laid down boundaries, never gave up on me, and was constantly praying for me. So.
Well, that's awesome, Bryan. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's information we all can benefit from and learn from. So with that said, I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, but Bryan, you're the CEO and co-founder of United Recovery Project. Can
Yes.
you tell us before we wrap this up, can you just tell us briefly how you made that leap, how you went through recovery and then decided to go on to a United Recovery Project?
Absolutely. So I worked as a behavioral health technician, which is basically the lowest part of the totem pole in treatment. It's $12 an hour being a tech and driving the clients back and forth from the housing. You're with them 24/7. You're taking them bowling. You're taking them to meetings. And I worked at the treatment center, and it was a good treatment center. And they had protocols, and they had, like, to me, that was just normal. It was a good treatment center, and I thought every treatment center was like that. I couldn't imagine it not being like that, right? And that was my only experience in treatment, was at this one treatment center that was a good place, and the people that ran it were good people, and the people that worked there were in recovery, and the clients didn't run the show. And if someone did something bad, they kicked them out, and no one, like, I didn't know anything about their health insurance benefits or anything like that. It was just a clinical place. I don't know, like, I never thought twice about anything they were doing. And I left treatment and I started my own business, and I started this motorcycle company with a friend of mine, and my life became motorcycles. And while I was doing the motorcycle thing, I started to see that there was all these treatment centers opening, and a lot of them were opening under just intensive outpatient, which is like one of the lowest levels of care that you can. And it's basically because I believe that it's cheap to open and it's easy to open, and people just get their head start like that, which there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of these places were fly-by-night treatment centers with owners that were not in recovery, which I'm not saying that you need to be in recovery to own a treatment center, but I believe that there's a language and a communication and standards that the recovery community has, that if you're not familiar with them, you might start doing things that you think are okay and just not really understand treatment or recovery, which is totally fine. Not every industry is perfect, whatever. And then over and over and over, it was just like every corner you went to, there was just some treatment center that was doing things that, you shouldn't be able to do to animals, right? Like, stuff was going on that it was mind blowing. I couldn't even believe that this was going on. And you would imagine, like, oh, well, they're not going to be open in 6 months, so they keep doing that. And then 3 years would go by, and not only are they still open, but they're expanding. And widely known in the community that they're committing fraud, that they're imprisoning addicts. Some people were prostituting the women. Just the craziest things imaginable. And this is going on in my backyard, and this is going on to my family, because in recovery, it kind of does become like a family. It is a family. You go to meetings and you see people for years. There's people that I haven't seen in 5 years, and when I run into them, we'll start talking for 2 hours because we just have that type of connection. So I started to feel like I needed to do something. And not everyone's in the position to do something, and not everybody wants to do something. And some people kind of just turn the other way and just say, well, that's just the industry they're in. Also, insurance companies weren't really paying a lot of money. People were cracking down on Florida. People weren't sending their kids to Florida, And some people would say, oh, well, we have to do these things because you can't make money anymore. So a lot of people's excuses were, well, you can't make money unless you do these things that are unethical, right? But 5 years ago, I had worked at a treatment center that was ethical and profitable, right? So I knew that that whoever was saying that was just like doing the easier, cheaper thing, you know. And I told my business partner that I wanted to open a treatment center. And looking back on it, I think it's kind of crazy because at the time I was 25 years old. But I feel like my whole life I've been a certain age, and it didn't really seem like I was that young, you know. And I was 25, which looking back, if somebody were to tell me that a 25-year-old was opening a treatment center, I'd kind of be like, oh, good luck, pal, you know. And we opened a treatment center in 2016. It was extremely difficult to open. We thought it would take about 3 to 4 months, and it probably took us about a year to open. And I had no idea about licensing. I had no idea about zoning. And I really just learned from trial and error and going to the city and talking to DCF and speaking with other people. Now, mind you, I've been pretty well known in the recovery community, so people were willing to help me. You know, there were people that were like, wow, if you open a treatment center, I know that it's going to be a good place, you know? And people started calling and making phone calls and saying, hey, I want to sit down with you. And a lot of people really, you know, mentored me along the way and still do. Like, I have a lot of close friends of mine that have been working in treatment for years and have left where they were working took a pay cut to come work at United Recovery Project, you know, because they just know me as a person. And I would say, like, our original staff, 50% of them I personally have known for 5+ years, you know. So a lot of the people that work there are South Florida recovery people, are people that I've known, you know, for years and I have personal relationships with. So when we opened, it was kind of like a little family, and it still is, you know. And we started with one house and one van, and 3 years later, we have, I believe, like basically 100 beds. We have all levels of care. We have an amazing reputation. People tell me, you know, nonstop all the time, you know, wow, like I hear very great things about you guys. Like, you guys have a solid reputation. And it hasn't been easy these past couple of years, but I believe through everything that we've been through, now we're able to say, like, hey, we're here to stay long term, you know. Because when we opened in 2016, I think a lot of people were like, who are these guys, you know? Some young 25-year-old kid runs a treatment center, you know. But I believe that when people ask me, like, what's different about United Recovery Project, it's the employees. Like, yeah, we have extremely nice housing and you know, we have nice vans and all this other stuff, but no one ever gets clean and says, oh, the treatment center I went to had like the nicest group rooms. You know, you need to make a connection with an employee. You need to have someone that works there to reach you, you know. And I believe that we just have extremely talented, special, amazing people that work at the treatment center, from the guy who cuts the lawn to the guy who runs the treatment center, you know, to the admission coordinators, from the techs to the group facilitators. We have people that want to work here. You know, we have people that come in and say, wow, you guys are United Recovery Project. I've heard about you guys. I want to come work here. You know, we have people that run groups at United Recovery Project that say, like, wow, that community in there wants to be here. Like, who are you people? You know, this isn't like another treatment center where it's 45 clients that don't want to be there, that are miserable. These people are motivated. And it's not that we have special clients that we cherry pick. It's not like we like found all the grateful addicts, and we have people that still struggle day to day. But I believe that we've made that connection with them from the day that they walked in the door, and they feel the love, you know? So that's my little snippet about that.
Awesome snippet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bryan. We're very appreciative, and we're very happy to hear your successful story and to having this relationship with United Recovery Project. And we just thank you for giving your time to us today so that we can learn more about
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much.
Appreciate it.